Welcome back, everybody. I was starting to get a bunch of comments on my video for the 5 configurations for the Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant in Microsoft 2020. Well, I've read your comments and I'm playing Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 and I've studied the new binding system and it looks like it's a lot more complex, but trust me, it's a better system than what we had in 2020. Okay, so let's start here. We're at the main screen and we go up to the settings button and then click on the controls box right here. And you can see that we have, as soon as it loads up, you can see that we have 3 different controls here. General controls, helicopter or airplane. I happen to have a helicopter selected, so it's going to show a helicopter here. And then we have specific controls, which are specific to the very aircraft that I'm using, in this case an Airbus H125. If I was to switch the aircraft to something else, like an airplane, let's just pick the first one here and go back, you can see that now it's airplane's controls instead of helicopter, and the specific L39 Albatross controls. So you don't necessarily create separate profiles for these different categories. The categories are kind of automatic. It's just the logic that the flight simulator uses. To demonstrate, let me just bring up the Alpha Flight Control. And you can see there's defaults here. So there's the Alpha Flight Controls 2024, what's this called? Transversal. And we have the Alpha Flight Controls 2024 Planes. So if I go down to the filters here, it says filters none. I'm going to click it till it says filters assigned. And you can see the different bindings that are by default that comes in Microsoft 2024. So this is how it's set up in the game. The button 13 is your set alternator. So you have these labeled switches on the Alpha Flight Control, and they kind of correspond to what's been bound here by default. You can certainly change these, but I don't do that on my Alpha Flight Control because, I mean, the buttons are labeled, so it kind of makes sense to use the defaults, you know, so it matches what the labels are. I do tend to maybe change some of the buttons that are up on the yoke itself. But with that being said, you can see as I scroll through here, some are categorized as airplanes, some are categorized as general. And if you look at what they are, general are, you know, cockpit views, camera views, external views here. So these are things that kind of apply broadly across the simulator, and it's not really specific to an airplane or a helicopter or balloon or what have you. These are things that are just kind of general controls inside the simulator. So things that are specific to an airplane are going to be your magnetos, alternators, you know, toggle afterburner if it's a jet. So those are the things that are going to be in the airplane controls. The generals are going to be in these general controls. And it's just the way they're categorized in the simulator. You don't have really control over this per se. But if you change something, so say I wanted to change the toggle smart camera as button 1. So if I delete this, and the way you delete it is to hover over it, and you can, well, I got to hover over it to do it, but if you see down in the corner, right around here, it disappeared. There's that unbind. If you hit a backspace, that's the quick way to unbind. So my toggle smart camera, actually it'll disappear because I have a filter set to assigned. As soon as I do that, it's asking me to create my new profile. And it's going to basically copy the default, and in this case I'd create something like general controls number 1 or something, but I don't necessarily want to edit that right now, so I'm going to cancel it. Now I haven't been able to find anything to demonstrate specific on this aircraft, but I have on the helicopter. So let me go back to the Airbus H125, and if I go to, let's see, instrument and systems not categorized, you can see things that are labeled specific. So if I go ahead and try and bind something here, let's see, I'm still on the Alpha yoke, but say I'll pick this first one and I'll click a button. So now it's prompting me to create a new specific profile, and then this binding would be saved in this specific controls. And that would be something that you would likely, obviously, keep on just this specific helicopter because it's a control that only works for the Airbus H125. Okay, so that's enough of an introduction for me to really get into why this is better than what we have in 2020. We need to set up some of our Bravo profiles, and that's what we're here to see anyway, setting up the 5 different configurations like I did in Microsoft 2020. So let's click on the Bravo, and we'll change the filters to assigned. You can see there are no general controls or specific controls set up, but there are helicopter controls. And if you look at what's bound, everything here says helicopters. So this helicopter has all helicopter specific bindings. And in 2020, we started with the complex twins. So let's change over to an airplane, and let's do the Baron. Okay. And you can see that there's a Bravo Throttle Quadrant set up here, none for general or specific. Let's go, and you can see everything bound is for airplanes. All right. Now in 2020, the switches that are above the throttles, how many switches? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the 7 switches that are up there, they were bound to the same switches of the Alpha flight control, which was really stupid because you really don't need 2 switches that do the same thing. So it looks like in 2024 they've bound them to some things that make a little bit more sense. I have kind of a custom setup that I've done with the switches, and I did put a video out there on how to do the switches for 2020. And honestly, guys, if you watch my 2020 videos, it still applies to 2024. Now that I've explained how this works, the binding themselves is pretty much the same. It's the same logic. These things are named the same things. So because I've been asked to do it, I'll go through it again, but I mean, those other videos are still valid. I don't want to go through binding all the switches, but I will bind one of them, okay? So the very first switch on the left-hand side, the easiest way to find out what something does is like you search by input and then go ahead and flick the switch on and off. And you can see that they've bound several things here. And I'm just going to blow these out because I don't want these bound to that first switch. So I can hit backspace. Now that I do that, it's prompting me, okay, now I'm leaving the default profile. So I got to put in, so just like in 2020, we're doing a complex twin is where we are starting. Because the default profile is really set up that it has the throttle prop mixture of a complex twin general aviation aircraft. So you can see my profile now says complex twin. Now the default still exists. This Bravo Throttle Quadrant can never be overwritten. So if you screw something up, you can always go back here and start again. But now I'm on my complex twin and I can edit this to my heart's content. So we're going to remove that binding. And for the last binding, I just want to show you there's another way to do it other than other than the backspace. You can click this little gear and go over and delete the assign control. That'll do the same thing and go back. It's just a lot of extra steps to do the same thing as just hitting backspace. So now that I've cleared that out, I'm going to bind. I want anti-ice. So they've actually bound anti-ice to another button here. I'm going to override it, so I'm going to do a set anti-ice on. To do that, I just click in here, and then it's scanning for this. So I'm going to click my switch on and off. So now my set anti-ice to on is bound to that switch. If I go up here to set anti-ice off, I have to start with the switch in the on position, click the mouse to start scanning, I turn the switch off, and then back on. So now it's bound to the very first switch. And that logic applies. Just continue on for the other 6 switches, bind them to whatever you want. And, I've done that in another profile that I have set up here for my general. These are the bindings and switches that I've already done. This is just my preference, but I'm not going to go through that for this video. We're going to continue on to binding the different throttles like we did in the first video. I do want to tell you, before you move on to binding the throttles, you want to make sure that you do all the switches the way you want them, because they're going to be used in every profile that we do here. So it's important that you set up your switches the way you want them in advance before moving on. This is exactly the same as what I said in the 2020 video. Once you have all your switches set up, you're done with the complex twin profile and you're ready to move on to the complex single. But before I do, I'm going to show you something that I didn't really show you in the first video. You can use the complex twin profile for all of your GA aircraft. If you just remove the throttle, prop, and mixture number 2, and then just plug the 3 in between, you have a complex single. If you remove the prop lever, now you have a basic single. It's just that the levers are kind of far apart. That's the only difference. So before I leave the complex twin, I wanted to show you one more thing. If for some reason you had to rebind the mixtures, props, or throttles, every one of these axes are inverted, meaning if I click on this gear, you can see set inverted axis is checked. That's unchecked, there's checked. So that's similar to in the original Microsoft 2020 where I had to choose reverse axis when we set up the throttles. And then several upgrades later, they got rid of that. So you didn't have to invert them. They were moving the correct direction when you set them up. But it looks like 2024, we're back to inverting things. So, I mean, if we look at the prop, the prop throttle, you can see this is all selected. So if you had to bind those from scratch, you're going to have to go in there and set the inverted axis for it to work properly. In my tutorial, I didn't have to do that because I was starting with the default profile, and the default profile already has the throttle prop mixtures already set up with inverted axes already checked. Now I'm going to configure the throttle quadrant from a twin-engine GA aircraft to a complex single. I'm going to start by removing the number 2 mixture, number 2 prop, and throttle. Next, I'll move everything over to the left side so they're right next to each other. The final step is to take all the levers to the right and move them down past the detents so they're out of the way. If you want to use the rubber covers, that's optional. I just put it in here for completion's sake. Okay, so the next thing you need to do is you need to come over to your complex twin, hit the little gear, and we're going to duplicate this and change it, name it to complex single. And this is actually easier than it was in 2020. All we got to do is scroll down here and find the mixture 2 axis. Hit backspace. The decrease mixture 2, hit backspace. Propeller 2, hit backspace. Toggle feather switch 2, backspace. Throttle 2 axis, backspace. Throttle 2 decrease, backspace. So essentially you've deleted the number 2 throttle, prop, and mixture. Now that we've eliminated the right engine on a twin, we have to move the levers over into the new slots. So the throttle is okay because that's still in the slot number 1. The prop we need to do the prop axis by clicking it and then moving that prop down. So now it's set. To toggle the feather, we click on that and we pull the prop lever down through the detent and back up. For mixture, we click on this mixture axis and we bring the mixture down. So that's bound. Decrease mixture for the shutoff, we click on that, bring it down through the detent and back up. So now the levers are bound and you have a complex single profile created. Now to create a basic single engine aircraft, it's quite simple. We just remove the prop lever and put the mixture lever in its place. Before, I'll move the empty lever down and conceal it with the rubber cover. Now we're going to go over and click the gear, duplicate, and create the basic single profile. Once that's set, we're going to go find, since it doesn't have a propeller, we're going to find propeller 1 axis, and we'll hit backspace to delete that. And we're going to toggle feather switch, delete that. And now, like before, we're going to have to move the mixture over 1 slot. So the mixture, we're going to click and pull the mixture down, and that's bound. And decrease mixture, we'll click, move the mixture down through the detent, back up, and it's bound. So now we finalize the basic single profile. Okay, now that we're done with the GA aircraft, we're going to duplicate the basic single again. And this time we're going to name it 4-engine jet. We're using the basic single profile because we need to delete all of the throttles in this. So there's only one to delete, one mixture, one throttle to delete in the 4-engine jet. So we'll go ahead and do that. Throttle 1 axis and backspace, it's gone. Throttle 1 decrease, backspace is gone. And the same for mixture and mixture decrease. Backspace on the mixture. And where did that mixture decrease? It dropped all the way down here. That's weird. All right, so we'll delete that. Here I am sitting in the Boeing 747 cockpit. Wanted to be in here because we're going to work on the 4-engine jet profile. Since we're going to be binding all the axes from scratch, we're not working from a default profile here. Wanted to be in the cockpit to make sure everything works as intended. So with that said, let's go to the settings, controls. We'll make sure that the 4-engine jet is selected. Let's work left to right. So the first thing we're going to bind is the spoiler lever. So, gotta spell it right. So the spoiler axis is what we're looking for. We'll click that, and we'll move the spoiler lever to bind that axis. Next thing we're going to do is type throttle. So we're going to bind 4 different throttles. So the throttle 1 axis. So we'll move that lever. We're also going to, for the reverser, we're going to bind the throttle 1 cut and the throttle 1 decrease, both to the same lever or reverser switch that's on top of the throttle arm. So we'll bind the cut to the button 9. We'll bind the decrease. And I'll show you why we're doing that. So while we're here, we need to go into the throttle axis and make that inverted. And then this throttle cut, we're going to want to go into the settings here and change this to a set control on release. So we'll go into the aircraft. I'll show you what that did. You can see the throttle here. I'm going to move it up. You see it's working. I'm going to move the reverser lever. You see it pops up, and then I'm going to push it down. And you see it pops down. So it's the binding on the throttle decrease that moves it up into the reverse position, and then the binding on the throttle cut on release is what turns it off when you bring that little lever back down. We're going to do the rest of the throttles that way as well. Again, search for throttle. And we're going to go to the throttle 2 axis. We'll move throttle 2 and we'll invert it. we're going to do the throttle cut, and we'll move that reverser arm. We'll do the throttle decrease, and we'll also move that reverser arm. And then on the cut, we're going to go in and select the set control on release. We'll do the same for throttle 3 axis. We'll move the third throttle. We'll invert it. And keep in mind, Microsoft 2020 eventually didn't require that to be inverted, so I don't know if 2024 is going to do it. So there might be some time somebody's watching this video where you don't have to reverse the axes. I have no idea, but as of launch, you had to. All right, reverser number 3 for the cut, reverser number 3 for the decrease, and on the cut, again, we're going to go in and set control on release. Throttle 4 axis, we're going to move throttle 4. Going to invert it. Throttle cut, moving the reversing arm. Throttle 4 decrease, moving the reversing arm. And on the cut, we're changing it to a set control on release. Hope you guys are getting the pattern here. I've done it 4 times. The last item to do is the flap, a lever. We'll start scanning. I'll move the flap lever and it's bound. So let's go back into the aircraft. Make sure everything's working. Spoiler arm works. Flap lever works. All the throttles work and move in the proper direction. And all the reversers move. I've noticed that when I put reversers on, a lot of times the spoiler will go backwards. It's kind of weird. Maybe typically you have the spoilers out when you do your reversers. I don't know. 2020 never did that. So now I'm going to push the reversers closed or turn them off by pushing them forward. All the levers pop forward. Everything's working correct. And now for the final airplane profile. We're going to copy the 4-engine jet, duplicate, and we're going to name this 2-engine jet. And we're going to remove. We're going to keep throttle 1, and we're going to keep throttle 2. And we're going to remove throttle 3. Backspace, 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 throttle 4. Now we have to rebind throttle 1 and throttle 2 because throttle 1 is now in the 3rd slot and throttle 2 is now in the 4th slot. So, axis is set. Remember to, that's already inverted. We're going to do the reverser here. Do the reverser here. Make sure this one is set control and release. It already is. So it looks like it keeps these. Throttle 2. Yep, still inverted. Reverser and reverser. Now, even though we're still in the 747, it ought to move the middle 2. Or no, actually it's 1 and 2. That makes sense. And the reverser. Yep, and the reversers move as well. So that completes the 2-engine jet profile. So now that we have all the profiles set up, I did allude to the fact earlier that Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is superior to 2020 with the way this works now. And really the absolute best function here is the fact that the profiles will follow the aircrafts. So see, I have a 4-engine jet here for the Boeing. If I change the aircraft, and let's bring up the Baron, go back and look, complex twin is already selected. So the profiles actually stay with the aircraft. In 2020, it didn't do that. You could be in an airliner, and then if you go to the Baron, you're going to have to go into the controls and go to the Bravo, and then you'd have to manually change from a 4-engine jet to the complex twin. So now as you fly different aircraft, and if you go into a Cessna 172 and you choose the basic single profile, it's going to always use the basic single profile. You're not going to be stuck on the complex twin if you didn't want it, or a jet profile if you didn't want it. So that really is where this program is much superior to 2020. Before I ended the video, I wanted to touch briefly on helicopters. I really don't advise flying helicopters with the Honeycomb Alpha and Bravo setup. Really, that's more for GA and jet aircraft that use yokes and throttles. To fly a helicopter, you really want to invest in a stick and ideally a collective, but I use a Thrustmaster Warthog stick and HOTAS. So the HOTAS, I'll just invert the throttle, so it kind of mimic, pulling back on the throttle kind of mimics pulling up on a collective. But if you do get a stick, I just want to show you here on the Alpha flight controls, and scroll down, set cyclic lateral axis and set cyclic longitudinal axis. This is basically the same thing in the airplane setup as aileron axis and elevator axis. Those are the things that you want to bind to a stick, pushing forward, pushing left and right on a stick, and forward and backward on a stick. And let me see here. And these are not set inverted. Okay, so they just work normally. And one last little piece of advice, if you're using the Alpha flight control, the Bravo Throttle Quadrant, and you're using a HOTAS throttle and a stick, that's a lot of devices to have. And you can kind of have some conflicts if you have a throttle setting on your HOTAS somewhere and you move a throttle on your Bravo, you can have conflicting inputs. So I bought this USB hub on Amazon that has buttons. It's a powered USB hub, so it can power your devices. But in my case, it has these little buttons on the side, so I can turn on and off various peripherals. So I can turn off the Alpha and Bravo if I'm going to use my Thrustmaster stick and HOTAS, or vice versa. Just a little tip to pass on. I found that it works really well. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, you can leave it in the comments below and I'll try and respond. But I'm still myself just trying to learn some of the ins and outs of the new 2024, but I think I kind of got the setup of this part just like I did in 2020. I think I got a good tutorial for you guys to really get your Honeycomb Bravo Throttle Quadrant set up and ready to have fun in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024.